Bigfoot, the Mothman, the Jersey Devil. We know their names, we've heard their stories, both real and imagined. But while Sasquatch and the Goatman are stealing the spotlight of America's collective imagination, hundreds of lesser-known cryptids have been haunting the smaller communities across the U.S., sometimes for centuries. The legends of these creatures may not have reached far beyond their localized regions, but for the populations that live alongside them, they are no less influential. In fact, sometimes it's the most localized cryptids that are the most unsettling. Tales of cursed alligator children that stalk Louisiana swamps, waiting to grab unwitting visitors by the ankle, for example. Others are decidedly less intimidating. Something like the Pennsylvania pig creature that dissolves under the weight of its own tears comes to mind. The legends are as diverse as the people and cultures that sustain them. Today, we'll be journeying across America to find just a few of its most obscure and sometimes bizarre cryptids. Now, I must warn you that if you get frightened by the cryptids in this video, or if you just get sleepy but can't quite fall asleep because of the glare of your computer screen, there is a solution. Manta masks are the best sleep masks for any humanoid species. If you need to sleep in a brightly lit room, Manta masks block out 100% of the light from your surroundings, and with an extremely comfortable, form-fitting style that doesn't press into your sensitive eyelids. Listen, I always thought that sleep masks were a gimmick. The ones I knew about were flimsy, too tight, and at best were like putting a piece of paper over my eyes. This Manta mask changed my mind completely. I live in an apartment with city lights that blast through the windows, so I'm not kidding when I say that I wear this every single night. I even keep it in my backpack so I can sneak naps at my day job. The eye covers are adjustable and super soft. They come in multiple styles like weighted, warming, aroma, silk, cooling gel, and even a pro version. All I can tell you is this: you should never discount the power of a good night's sleep and how much total darkness helps with that. So how about you join the pro-nap movement? Use code ThoughtPotato during checkout at mantasleep.com for a sweet discount, or click that link in the description. The swamps of Louisiana are notoriously difficult to navigate. The deep, foreboding water combined with thick forests create an air of mystery that has enthralled people for generations. So when French immigrants arrived in Louisiana in the 1700s, it was perhaps no surprise that a certain legend would follow them there, taking up residence in the thick, dark swampland that seemed to surround them. The immigrants had a name for this legend, and it was one that went back for hundreds of years: Lougarou, a kind of werewolf. In France, their ancestors told stories of a half-man, half-wolf terror that stalked the night, searching for disobedient children to devour. Adults weren't completely safe either. If you failed to follow the rules of Lent for 7 years in a row, you ran the risk of becoming a Lougarou yourself, doomed to bear the physical manifestation of your sinful ways. Its appearance varied somewhat, but usually the Lougarou was a tall, imposing figure with the head of a wolf. Some appeared to be almost fully wolf-like, with the ability to run on its hind legs, while others had a body that, except for its head, could be taken as a normal human. The Lougarou continued to wander the swamps and fields of southern Louisiana, though its name would change slightly over the years. Lougarou became the easier to pronounce Rougarou, though even today the terms are often used interchangeably by the locals. Cajun legend still holds that breaking the rules of Lent can lead to your transformation into a Rougarou, but without the requirement of doing so over 7 consecutive years. Other versions of the legend say that the Rougarou is under a 101-day curse, unless the affected person can transfer the curse to another human being. This kind of curse usually comes from a local witch or voodoo priestess. Fortunately, the Cajun population wasn't defenseless against their terrifying wolfman. Oral tradition stated that in order to protect your home from the Rougarou, you simply had to lay 13 small objects by each of your doors. Pennies or beans would work just fine. The approaching Rougarou, not known for its intelligence, would invariably stop to count the items laid there. But as everyone knows, Rougarous can't count higher than 12, so it would have to restart the count again and again until the sunrise drove it away. The legend of the Rougarou has been ingrained in Louisiana culture for centuries, and its image can be found on drinks, as costumes, and even in a yearly exhibit at the local zoo. But if you're a disobedient child or someone who doesn't abide by the rules of Lent, be warned. The truth of the legend is still out there, wandering the dark swamplands, illuminated only by the light of the full moon. It was an early morning, or perhaps a late night, for an unnamed businessman driving down a windy, lonely stretch of road just outside Loveland, Ohio. The stillness of the night was broken only by the car's twin cones of light as the businessman raced down the highway. But at about 3:30 a.m. on that night in 1955, something abruptly appeared in the road ahead, and the car screeched to a halt. Upon exiting his car, the businessman was shocked to see 3 beings huddled on the shoulder of the road, each about 3 feet tall and standing on 2 legs. In the harsh light of the car's headlights, he saw that they were covered in leathery skin, had webbed hands and feet, and distinctly frog-like heads. The man observed the 3 creatures for about 3 minutes, before one of them turned to him and raised what the man described as a wand above its head. Sparks began to fly from the end of the so-called wand, and the businessman promptly returned to his car and peeled out of the area. Or maybe it was just one frog-like bipedal creature crossing over the guardrail of a local bridge. Or maybe it was under that bridge. There are actually 3 different versions of the same encounter, and it's impossible to pinpoint which one is the most accurate. What is for certain is that Loveland, Ohio would never be the same. This town and the surrounding area was being stalked by the Loveland Frogman. It would be nearly 17 years before another major sighting occurred. At about 1 a.m. on a cold night in 1972, a police officer was traveling by car along a stretch of Riverside Road headed toward Loveland. He, too, caught a glimpse of some type of creature on the side of the road. He slowed the vehicle, but before he could come to a stop, the creature bolted across the road and into clear view. The officer was stunned. He later described a small creature between 3 and 4 feet tall, with leathery skin and features similar to a frog or lizard. But it wasn't until the creature rose up on 2 legs and scurried off that the officer was truly taken aback. The creature scrambled over a guardrail and disappeared into the Ohio River. A second officer later came to the scene and found scratch marks on the railing, exactly where the first officer had said they would be. Then, in 2016, during the beloved summer of Pokemon Go, a man named Sam Jacobs, with phone in hand, was searching for those elusive pocket monsters. While walking along the banks of Lake Isabella, he saw something that defied belief. "We saw a huge frog near the water. Not in the game, this was an actual giant frog," Jacobs later told a news station. "Then the thing stood up and walked on its hind legs. I realize this sounds crazy, but I swear on my grandmother's grave this is the truth." He described the creature as being around 4 feet tall, right in line with the other sightings of the fabled frogman. He even managed to snap a few photos, though as with most cryptid sightings, the evidence wasn't conclusive. Throughout the years, detractors of the frogman theory have chalked the sightings up to misidentification or outright falsification. And while it is true that another officer in the 1970s shot and killed a tailless iguana that was confirmed by the first officer to have been the creature he saw, and while it is true that the sighting in 2016 was later declared a hoax, the mysterious Loveland Frogman cannot be so simply written off. This bipedal frog is ingrained in the culture of Ohio, his legend even being adapted into a 2014 musical. The takeaway here is that cryptids like these often take on a life of their own, and nothing, including the facts, can stand in their way. As we've seen so far, dear traveler, there are a lot of obscure cryptids to discover in America. So many, in fact, that this script ended up being way longer than my other videos. We've still got more to cover here, but if you crave even more, you can find an extended version of this video by becoming a channel member. Deep within the hemlock forests of northern Pennsylvania dwells a creature so elusive, it's only been glimpsed by loggers seen scurrying away from lumber camps. It was first formally described by William Thomas Cox in a book called Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, published in 1910. Cox described a creature about the size of a pig that was covered in warts and moles, and as a result was generally unhappy. In fact, Cox writes, it is said by people who are best able to judge to be the most morbid of beasts. Hunters who are good at tracking are able to follow a squonk by its tear-stained trail, for the animal weeps constantly. When cornered and escape seems impossible, or when surprised and frightened, it may even dissolve itself in tears. It may sound strange to think that a creature could dissolve itself in tears, but that's exactly what the squonk does. Mr. J.P. Wentling, formerly of Pennsylvania but now at St. Anthony Park, Minnesota, had a disappointing experience with a squonk near Mont Alto. He made a clever capture by mimicking the squonk and inducing it to hop into a sack. in which he was carrying it home, when suddenly the burden lightened and the weeping ceased. Wentling unslung the sack and looked in. There was nothing but tears and bubbles. In 1939, the squonk was described in even more detail in a book called Fearsome Critters. According to this account, the squonk's distribution was once fairly wide. Unfortunately, due to the creature's low intelligence, they would often travel along the banks and shores of lakes and rivers, submerging only their left feet in the water. As a result, over time, the species developed webbed left feet. Problem is that when the squonk would swim across larger bodies of water, it could only swim in clockwise circles, causing them to eventually drown. This account also solidifies Cox's description of the squonk's appearance. The squonk is given to constant weeping over his really unsettling appearance and can sometimes even be tracked by his tear-stained trail. Though sightings of the squonk have become ever more uncommon over the years, this cryptid's legendary legacy will always live on. Scientists have discovered that certain substances, such as a few molecules, cannot be isolated or captured without actually catalyzing their own polymerization and decomposition. This could be thought of as dissolving in their own tears, and so are now called chemical squonks. The tale of the squonk is a tragic one, and I'm sure I speak for many Pennsylvanians when I say that I hope that however many are left in the wild, that they've learned to love themselves as much as we do. We now move our search to the northwest, but to fully grasp the legend of this Michigan monster, we'll have to step back in time. The year was 1847. The deep forests of the Great Lakes state were still largely uninhabited, so it's no surprise that the sightings of this beast began with lumberjacks. As the story goes, a group of lumberjacks caught sight of a dog near their encampment. They began to chase the dog for reasons unknown, and eventually cornered the animal in a hollow log. As they drew near, though, the dog let out an unearthly scream, crawled out of the log, and to the lumberjacks' shocked amazement, stood upright. In its upright form, the men saw a 7-foot-tall beast with steely blue eyes, the torso and limbs of a man, and the head of a ferocious canine. Needless to say, the men ran for it, broke camp, and never returned to the area again. Thus began a pattern that would continue as the so-called Michigan Dogman would enter the public consciousness every 10 years for many decades. In 1897, near Buckley, a farmer was found slumped over his plow, seemingly dead of a heart attack. What made this particular death notable, however, were the giant dog-like tracks that surrounded the man's dead body. Skipping ahead to 1937, a report surfaced from a man named Robert Fortney, who shot a rifle at a pack of wild dogs that threatened him. Most of the dogs ran off in fright, but one did not. Instead, it rose to its hind leg and pierced Mr. Fortney's soul with a yellow-eyed gaze. The normally skeptical man was forced to confront what his eyes beheld that day, a dog-like creature with the torso and limbs of a man. Stories like these continued to pop up every 10 years or so throughout the 20th century, but it wasn't until 1987 when the Michigan Dogman grew to local fame. That year, radio producer Steve Cook recorded a song called The Legend. This song covered the legend in detail, and though its tone was certainly tongue-in-cheek, it greatly increased local awareness of this fearsome creature. Then, in 2007, a video of the Michigan Dogman appeared online. The video, dubbed the Gable film in the years since, seemed to show a hulking, werewolf-like creature close to attacking a Michigan family. Was this footage later proven to be a fabricated short film? Maybe, but that doesn't change the truth. The Dogman still lurks within the deep forest of Michigan and its Upper Peninsula, and as of this recording, it's only 5 more years until we see him again. It was a cool, crisp night in the early fall of 1952. 2 brothers, Edward and Fred May, and their friend Tommy Heyer were getting ready to turn in for the evening, when the dark sky was set ablaze by a bright light. The light passed over the land of local farmer G. Bailey Fisher before going dark once more. It was unlike anything the boys had ever seen before. They immediately went to the home of a neighbor and told her what they saw. The 4 of them recruited a National Guardsman and 2 children for some reason, and later that night set out to find what had made such a cosmic disturbance. The group made their way across Farmer Fisher's land for a time, and upon cresting a hill, they saw a pulsing red light. And in the pale light of their flashlights, they saw a tall, man-like figure with a round red face surrounded by a pointed, hood-like shape. The creature then made a hissing sound and glided toward them, causing even the stalwart National Guardsman to flee the scene in terror. The encounter was very brief, but needless to say, it was something the group never forgot. Later, members of the little group would further describe the creature as being roughly 10 feet tall, with a dark black or green body, small claw-like hands, and a head that resembled an ace of spades, and glowing orange eyes. Sound fanciful? Perhaps even impossible? Tell that to the local reporter who later revisited the site, only to find skid marks in the field, as well as an odd, gummy deposit that can only be attributed to a UFO landing. A drawing was made of the creature based directly on the description given by Kathleen May, the neighbor to whose home the boys rushed that night. This drawing was once lost to time, but was recently rediscovered. The beast it shows could strike fear into anyone's heart. The story made waves at the time, and the Flatwoods Monster, as it was now called, has become a kind of mascot for the region. Its hooded countenance adorns t-shirts, trinkets, book covers, and even chairs. Of course, no good encounter is without its naysayers. They will claim that the light the three boys saw that night in 1952 was in fact a meteor, and that the creature that startled them was actually a barn owl, a bird of prey whose face, admittedly, could be perceived as an ace of spades. But what those skeptics fail to realize is that nearly 70 years later, the Flatwoods Monster would be featured in a video game called Fallout 76, where players can hunt down and kill the Phantom of the Flatwoods in the game's Appalachia region. It's clear that no video game developer would go to the trouble of modeling a cryptid if there weren't a 100% chance of it existing. Many of the more popular cryptids bear similarities to other creatures, which allows us to have a frame of reference for their existence. Bigfoot, for example, could be seen as a kind of ape, and the Loch Ness Monster has long been interpreted as something similar to a plesiosaur. But what kind of dreadful abomination could result from a combination of a bear, a raccoon, and a sheep? That horror is known well to the residents of the southwestern region of West Virginia, and they've given it a name: Sheepsquatch. This horned beast likely bided its time for thousands of years, but by the 1990s, the white thing was no longer content to live in the shadow of the Mothman. The sightings began in 1994 when a former Navy seaman saw a large, rambling beast making its way through the forest. Its fur was stark white and it moved on four legs. Upon reaching a small creek, the beast crouched down and began to scoop water with its forelimbs, bringing the water to its mouth, much like a raccoon does with its food. Later that same year, 2 Boone County children were playing in their yard when a similar, large, white, bear-like creature emerged from the woods. This time, though, it reared up on its hind legs, at which point it towered at more than 6 feet tall. Sightings continued, but one of the most notable and recent encounters occurred in 2015. 6 campers had made their way into the forest near Folks Run, Virginia. The night had been uneventful, but at around midnight, the campers caught a glimpse of some enormous creature moving through the distant trees, covered in completely white fur. As with some previous sightings, the creature was able to stand on its hind legs, though this time the size estimate was over 8 feet tall. Upon noticing the campers, the creature ran toward them, only momentarily impeded by a creek that separated them. But as the creature waded across the water, the campers heard an ear-splitting, guttural growl from the distance. The approaching Sheepsquatch stopped and turned its face upward, seemingly startled by the noise. It then let out a whimper and took off at a run, away from the noise. The campers, to their credit, decided that was probably enough wilderness for one night and left the scene in a hurry. One of the more interesting aspects of the Sheepsquatch is its ability to move between bipedal and quadrupedal stances with relative ease. This makes this white, horned beast a double threat, able to move with the speed and power of a bear, while also able to navigate the forest with the agile efficiency of a biped. The legend of the Sheepsquatch is only one of the more recent additions to Appalachia's pantheon of frightening beasts, but with sightings like these, it appears that it can more than hold its own. Legends of tall, bipedal, hairy, ape-like creatures aren't new. There's the Yeti, the skunk ape, grassman, and of course, the almighty Bigfoot. The locations these creatures inhabit are nearly as diverse as their names, but it wasn't until 1971 that a creature very reminiscent of Sasquatch would make its way to the heart of the Midwest. The Missouri Monster, or Momo for short, was first sighted in July of that year, just on the outskirts of a town called Louisiana. 2 ladies by the names of Joan Mills and Mary Ryan had stopped a road trip for a picnic. They just began to eat when they were hit by an extraordinarily foul odor. They thought they were about to meet a family of skunks, but the reality was much, much worse. "I turned around and this thing was just standing there in the thicket," Miss Mills said. The weeds were pretty high, and I just saw the top part of this creature. It was staring down at us." Miss Ryan added, "It was half ape and half man. I've been reading up on the abominable snowman since then, and from stories and articles you get the idea that these things are more like gorillas. This thing was not like that at all. It had hair over the body as if it was an ape, yet the face was definitely human. It was more like a hairy human." Then, according to Miss Mills, it made a little gurgling sound like someone trying to whistle underwater. The pair immediately bolted for their car, got inside, and locked the doors. Unfortunately, they'd left the keys behind in their rush, and so were forced to watch as the hairy ape-like creature devoured the meal that still lay out on the picnic blanket. The harrowing experience eventually ended when the creature retreated, but Momo would reappear almost exactly 1 year later, this time seen by 2 young boys playing outside their home, again on the outskirts of Louisiana. A dark, 8-foot-tall ape-like creature stood by a nearby tree, holding the carcass of a dog under its arm. Its fur was flecked with blood. This incident led police to search for the hulking figure, and indeed, they tracked it to an abandoned cabin nearby, though even the hunting dogs they brought with them were too afraid of the foul-smelling beast to pursue it. In the end, Momo slipped away, and though sightings have occurred intermittently throughout the years, the encounters were never as close nor the memories so vivid as those 2 summers in the early 70s. Did Momo migrate to a more isolated location, like the swamps of the actual state of Louisiana? No one knows for sure. Perhaps it moved to Florida, where it goes by the name of skunk ape, content to share its fame with the mythical Florida man. Fortunately, even if Momo is never sighted in Missouri again, its legacy will live on. A film called Momo, the Missouri Monster was released in 2019, and it's a film that will forever commemorate the Show Me State's very own Bigfoot. Ultimately, these lesser-known cryptids may have failed to capture the imagination of the entire world, as some others have, but that doesn't mean they are without a place in their respective cultures. Instead, real or not, they reflect the regions they inhabit. After all, it's the people who birthed their legends, and it's the people who sustain their life. At their best, these cryptids unite those same people with a common understanding, a kind of shared knowledge. Of course, it helps that every single one of the creatures on this list is absolutely and 100% real. Yes, the world is full of monsters, both astounding and somewhat ridiculous, and if you can't get enough of them, be sure to check out this video. Thanks for watching, and remember, you matter.